Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all to this panel on countering violent extremism, recruitment, rhetoric, and radicalization, which is held in partnership with the International Center for the Study of Violent Extremism. My name is Alberto Fernandez, president of Middle East Broadcasting Networks, which includes Al Hura Television, and I'll be your moderator. As the Islamic State suffers constant reverses on the battlefield, but Salafi jihadist ideology retains its potency both in the East and West, this panel is particularly timely. Some may think that what we're talking about today is yesterday's news, and that is certainly a narrative one sees in the media a lot these days. But the reality is somewhat different. In December 2018, in the last few days alone, we had two very graphic examples of the reality we face. In the United States, in the last few days, a young man, 21-year-old man named Damon Joseph, was arrested. He had pledged loyalty to the Islamic State in September 2018. And he was inspired by Anwar al-Awlaki, dead 7 years ago. Lamentably, also, as you know, in the last few days, we had a young man named Sharif Chakat, the killer, or the shooter in Strasbourg in France, a 29-year-old, second-generation Frenchman, a petty criminal, ex-convict, converted to radicalism in prison, something we've seen very often, and also an ISIS supporter. This is after Mosul. This is after the fall of Raqqa. This is after the Islamic State has been so deteriorated by the international coalition. So the issue is very timely and very important. We have a very strong panel and limited time to do them justice in their brilliance and multifaceted accomplishment. We have Omar Mubulkus, prevention therapist and behavioral interventionist at the West London Initiative. We have Dr. Elizabeth Kendall, senior research fellow in Arabic and Islamic studies at Oxford. We have Peter Bergen, vice president for global studies and fellows at the New America. And we have Dr. Ann Speckhard, director of ICSVE. Dr. Speckhard, over to you. You're going to introduce to us an ICSVE video as an opening to our discussion.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. So the video that we're going to see just at the beginning is an example of a counter-narrative. It's called Rewards of the Islamic State. It's an Iraqi that was in prison, and we thank Abu Ali al-Basri, who's here. We thank him. He's the head of the Falcon Cell and the General Directorate of Intelligence and Counterterrorism in Iraq. And he was kind enough to let us make this interview along with many others that we've cut into counter-narratives. ICSVE has been busy over the last 3 years interviewing 101 ISIS defectors, returnees, and prisoners around the world in Central Asia, Balkans, Europe, Iraq, with Abu Ali's generous help, and Syria. And the reason that we embarked on this program is, as Omar said last night, in response to Brett McCurk's remarks when he was talking about killing our way out of ISIS. Well, you can kill a man, but it's much harder to kill an idea. And that's what we're working on, breaking the ISIS brand. It is a brand. They're selling a dream. They continue to sell it, even though the caliphate has lost all its territory, or nearly all of it. And we decided to combat ISIS's prolific presence on the internet through interviewing insiders, getting them on video, and then turning it back on the internet and in face-to-face encounters with videos. We've made 80 so far. So each one is based on a 1 to 2 hour interview, in-depth psychological interview, asking all kinds of questions of the person about why they joined, who they were before they joined, what their experiences on ISIS were, and if they're willing to denounce ISIS, to denounce it and to speak against the group. And that we have 80 made so far. They're all on YouTube. They're free for anybody to use, and they're subtitled in all the languages that ISIS recruits in. Well, I shouldn't say all, nearly all. And I want to be sure before we play it, and keep in mind that ISIS was able to recruit 40,000 foreign fighters. So this idea is virulent. and they were prolific in their recruiting efforts. So we tried to mirror them by making emotionally evocative videos, and we used some of their propaganda images, but reframed them with disgust and with denunciation. And I also want to be sure to thank the state of Qatar, who's been one of our major funders on this project. They put our project on steroids, and we're very, very thankful for that, along with some other funders, which will go unnamed for now. Anyway, you can play the video, and it's about 5-6 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion. Thank you.
My dad, he wanted to live the really Islamic life. My dad came first, and then he called me. He just said, life is better here, you can wear your whole hijab, and we are not oppressed here. Just that my dad said I'm not coming back was enough for me to come, actually. I never watched, and when my dad called me, I tried to watch on YouTube. I looked up like how is life in ISIS. There wasn't really anything on YouTube. And he convinced me to come, so I came. They entered me in a pickup, and they took me to a woman's house. In Bab Limon, I stayed for a week, and then they take me to Raqqa. The Raqqa is like a big house full of women. I told them I have my dad here, and they went up, looked up for him, and they brought him. My husband was a soldier in Iraq. When we got married, he went 3 times. And then he stopped going. He didn't like it anymore. He didn't like the way ISIS thinks. They have a problem in their religion, how they do stuff. Mostly they punish with death. It's the most common punishment. And after mostly 3 months of marriage, I got pregnant. He stopped going to work, and then we tried to get out of ISIS. But so many things happened. It's very difficult to get out. We're gonna cross the border. We went to the last point of last town. The problem is we're a lot, and Free Syrian Army was advancing, and everybody was evacuating from that little town. Us going to there was a little bit suspicious. And when we are going, there is a car of police that comes. They're saying to my dad, why are you taking your family? He's like, oh, just here. He's like, yeah, no, we know. And then they came and took my dad. They left us in a house first. They took my dad to prison. They interrogated him. And then they came and took us. They put us in prison, but then we needed to evacuate Al-Bab, so they evacuated and they took us to Raqqa. They wanted us to put us in a woman's house, but we women, we ran away. When they put my husband and my dad in prison, my dad, because he's older, he just stayed 2 weeks and he got out. But my husband, because he's younger, he stayed a long time. He stayed like almost 6 months. So my dad was like, yeah, no, I'm not staying here, let's go. So we started walking, and then they started shooting on us. They started shooting on us. They killed all the men. He died in front of me. I got a bullet in my back and a bullet other places. They came and interrogated me. Like, why do you want to go? You should fear God. And I just said, yeah, a big mistake. Just playing the game with them. And then I got out. They put me in a woman's house until my husband got out of prison. 2 months we stayed and we got out. because it's hard. You want freedom. You want to go out. It's just psychological. It's difficult. I have a son and I'm pregnant 7 months. But being in prison with your kid is worse, I think, than being in prison alone. Because you see him suffer. He's 1.5 years, so he doesn't really understand. So he thinks it's fun. He goes out. He sits in front of the tent, takes stones and starts throwing on everyone. So it's all fun. But for me, really, just see him like this. He almost needs to go to school. He normally needs to play with stuff. They can say it's Islam, but it's not really. No, they're bad Muslims. They're not Muslims. Don't even call them Muslims, please. That just gives a bad name to Muslims. When you go to Syria, they hate us. Yeah, they hate them. They hate ISIS. I heard about slaves. I heard about how they treat slaves. Yeah, that was also a reason. That's why I'm saying they're wrong. Because how they treat slaves was not on the Islamic way of treating slaves. Of course I want to go home. I want to go to my mother. My sister got so many kids, I don't even know them. My family doesn't know my care yet. If they put me in prison, that's the consequences of my mistakes, so I will have to live with them. Don't even look up ISIS, forget ISIS.
So I'm sorry, we got a different film than what I expected. This one was interviewed in Syria, thanks to the YPG. And although I wanted to show you the one from our interviews with Abu Ali, and she's Belgian, obviously. But we have 80 videos. I guess there was a mix-up.
Okay, thank you. Why don't we just start with that, and we'll start with Omar. I think this is an effective, a typical and well-done version of the genre of anti-terrorism video. But it's worth looking at and worth asking that question. Is it truly effective? Does it really reach the heart of the matter? And Omar, I wonder, with your experience and your knowledge of the street and of this issue, how do you see it? What would be your remarks about this?
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the host to give me the opportunity to give you something, what's going on the ground. I work on the ground. I worked 10 years in prison as a therapist and working with terrorism charge offenders, and now I work for the Prevent with local community young people. I start with the verses of the Quran. Allah said in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Verily, Allah will never change the condition of the people until they change what within themselves. Now, it comes to the work, what we do in prevention. By using the video of Dr. Anna Speckard and the team, it has been really productive on the ground. I'll tell you why. Because we try to measure the sexes. And now, how do you measure sexes working with young individuals who said, society has rejected me, I'm anti-establishment, it's us against them, and there's a group called Al-Muhajirun, means the emigrant in London, recruiting people, and the like of Abu Rumaysa, who is already in Iraq. How do you deal with that? We run a many groups project with the young people. By playing one of the video, what I got is after playing the video is, we said, let's have a discussion. What do you think of these videos, this research? This is what the young person said. 13 between 16. It has stopped us even thinking of joining these criminal gangs. This is not Islam. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam cares, has a rahmatul alameen, has a mercy for mankind. But Mr. Baghdadi, I was giving a different perspective of it. Then I played this video, this actual video with a group of mothers who are very reluctant and do not want to engage with any counterterrorism, police, teachers, or anything. So they called us, they said, look, we need to engage with these mothers because many of their son they've lost their son. Ground up about 25 mothers in a room like this, and I played the video. What I got from the mothers is, number one is, it's touched them, their heart. They're crying. They said, why don't we have more research like this on the ground rather than using actors? This is reality. So it is for us in prevention, counterterrorism is very productive when we add our training with that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Kendall, Elizabeth, I was wondering your views, especially with your deep experience on Yemen, which was in many ways one of the pioneers in jihadist propaganda, even before the rise of the Islamic State with AQAP. Wonder if your views on the issue in general and this in particular.
Well, I think it's essential to work with defectors, as Anne does and as Omar does. One of the things I've noticed in Yemen, in my own work there, is that Al-Qaeda, the dominant group, also works with ISIS defectors. And we've seen a lot of that this year. It takes the ISIS fighters it's captured, gets them on film, and then distributes that in order to keep recruiting for Al-Qaeda, not for ISIS. But it's super interesting to see the kinds of stories that they highlight in Al-Qaeda, and we could definitely learn from that. They're not highlighting so much the fighting or the brutality, because after all, Yemen is at war. We have conflict zones all around the Middle East. What they highlight, and what clearly works for them, is the kind of thing that we might not value in our offices in the West, and we might not see as worth highlighting. Things like a lack of respect, not taking care of old people, not allowing your fighters to go back and visit their tribe or family, giving someone 80 lashes for eating 4 cans of tuna. I mean, all sorts of really weird testimonies that we would probably ignore, but which they choose to highlight. And on this point, I also like to stress that what Anne and Omar have both said on local narratives is extremely important, and not to assume that one size fits all when it comes to counter-narratives. We need very, very good, strong local knowledge about how these groups work in particular towns, in particular governorates, in particular countries. It's not the case that we tried this in Iraq and therefore we can now try it in Libya or Yemen. It needs much higher pixelation than that. I am an advocate of gathering strong survey data, and indeed, when I was trying to find out what motivated about 4,000 fighters in Yemen from joining Al-Qaeda, I decided to go to Yemen and ask, and to actually collect the data myself in the areas where Al-Qaeda was recruiting. And that gave us many more answers, which I don't want to take up too much of my time, but I'd be very pleased to... Do I have another minute? Or? Go ahead. What we discovered was that there was no appetite for a caliphate or for religious leaders to intervene in everyday life. Only 21% of respondents around the east of Yemen actually thought that imams should intervene in daily life. And so what was it that motivated them? Well, my survey showed that most respondents, their greatest concern was access to electricity and water. And of course, in a failing state, who provided that in 2015? Al-Qaeda did. And when I analyzed Al-Qaeda's Twitter feed, every single tweet that they produced while they were in charge of a state, really, in the east of Yemen, run out of Mukalla, 56% of all of their tweets were about community development projects. And so it was not the case that vast areas of Yemen were radicalized. It was the case that vast areas of Yemen decided to passively tolerate extremists because they were better than what the government was.
Peter Bergen, I'm wondering, looking at this video, one thing that struck me, of course, is it's an effective video, but one thing we learned from it is that the woman featured actually was not radicalized through social media, as we often talk to. Her father did it. It's her father that encouraged her to come to the caliphate. I wonder if you could address the whole issue of the varying ways that people are radicalized and, kind of what you see here and in general about that issue.
Well, thank you very much, Anne, for doing the video and for putting this panel together, and thank you to the Doha Forum for having this panel. The philosopher Immanuel Kant said, from the crooked timber of humanity, not a straight thing is made. And I think what he meant by that is, in answer to your question, Ambassador, is, human beings, there is no sort of one explanation of why they do these things, particularly when killing innocent strangers is a kind of unusual activity. And why people do that, there's a whole set of reasons, and I agree completely with Elizabeth that these are very local. I looked at 450 cases of Americans who were joining jihadi groups, and some of whom carried out lethal attacks. And the more you know about these individual cases, at a certain point you hit a wall because it's about the nature of evil, which is not completely explicable. So why would Major Nidal Hassan, an army major who had everything, he was earning a good salary, why did he kill 14 complete strangers in Fort Hood, Texas? And when you really dig into the details, yes, he was very Islamically observant, but that's only one very small part of the larger story. He was a very disappointed man. His career was stalling. He was unmarried. He was about to turn 40. He had no friends. He was unmarriageable. His parents had died early. And for him, interestingly, he printed up business cards which said SOA, Soldier of Allah. And so for him, killing these basically innocent strangers at Fort Hood, Texas, was a way of kind of a heroic self-conception of this, that he saw himself as this soldier of Allah. And again, when I looked at these cases, almost all of which are men, they were often zeros trying to be heroes. They were trying to be a hero in their own story. And we all want to be heroes in our own story. Some people join, the U.S. military, or there's lots of different ways of doing that. In this case, and I often think, I'm talking in the American context here. You think about the 1970s. There was a lot of terrorism in the United States. The Weather Underground, the Black Panthers. There were 100 hijackings in the 1970s in the United States. So there's a lot of political violence in the United States as part of our history. It just happens to be right now that one of the few avenues to kind of carry this out is jihadi ideology. A lot of the previous ideologies that people are attracted to, like Marxist ideology, have largely gone away. So it's a kind of maybe a cop-out to your question, because I think the reason that people join these groups is very, very, very personal. But I will say, I'm looking at the video, which is just seen for the first time. The video underlines something, I think, which is quite important, which is ISIS was a Middle Eastern phenomenon and a European phenomenon, in a sense. It was not a Western phenomenon. The United States, Australia, Canada were largely resistant to this because they're countries built on an immigration that are able to absorb Muslim immigrants in a better way, in particularly in the United States than is the case in Europe. And maybe when we can kind of unpack that point a little bit more. But the underlying conditions that produced the woman in the video and her family going over to fight, I think, continue to exist in both in the Middle East and Europe. So we'll certainly see a son of ISIS. The question is, how successful will that group be?
Thank you, Peter. Anne, I wonder, could you tell us more about this video and about Salma? How do you see the ethics of her being detained, and does that help or hurt the story? Is it irrelevant? Is it something that is, maybe you could give us a little more detail and background on it?
All of you, I wish you would look at Washington Examiner today or look on our Twitter feed, because we just put out a piece from Camp Rouge. She was in Camp Rouge, and the wives of ISIS that are caught in Syria are put in detention Well, the men are too. They're put in detention. None of them have charges against them. And you can have your opinion. Probably most of the men were fighters. Most of the women were stay-at-homes, although we have talked to women that have been horrible abusers, flogging other women and biting them with a device, and some women being killed by being bitten by this device. So there are definitely horrific women in ISIS. But most of those that we've talked to, like Salma, went to get married because they were in love. She followed her father in. She's from a divorced family. And the worst part is seeing their kids, because their kids are held in this detention camp. And some of the women said, I have a relative back in Belgium, France, wherever it happens to be, that would take my child, but I'm not allowed to send my child back home. And so when we're filming them, I always ask at the end of the interview, will you hold your toddler on your lap? Is he a terrorist? Because these kids are innocent. They were born into ISIS in Raqqa or other places, or they were brought into ISIS. And I think most people would agree this is abusive parental behavior. And in most cases at home, our countries would remove the children from their parents. And in this case, I would hope remove them and bring them back. But it's a real debate in Europe right now that they don't want them back. And it's human rights issues.
Thank you for that. I think for the next round, I want to pick up on something actually that Peter highlighted, which I think fits in very well with this discussion. And I'll pose the same question to all of you. This was a response to ISIS. It's kind of pushing back against the Islamic State. But it is not in any way a counter-narrative. Right? It's not an alternate proposal or an alternate idea. And Peter mentioned very interestingly, it's true, Canada, the United States, Australia, they certainly have their problems with jihadism, but not as it was in the Middle East or in Europe. Those places have a narrative. There's a story. We just say in America, we talk about the American story, the American narrative. And obviously, this is historic and it can change over time depending on political conditions. But I wonder if each of you could talk a bit about the issue of counter-narratives, an overused word where you know, often people put that out, I think, and often there's not a lot there. There's no meat in that sandwich. Why don't we start backwards and start with Anne and then
I want to
work
start
your
on
way.
this end because I want to define our terms. This is a big debate in Europe as well. Should we be using counter-narratives as in using an insider to speak back against the group? And so in that case, this is a counter-narrative, that it's, you know, saying ISIS is un-Islamic, highly brutal, corrupt, and that's what all of our videos say in one way or another, and don't join. But where does that leave you? You joined a terrorist group, or you're thinking about joining a terrorist group because it's meeting some inside need. As you said, Peter, it's highly psychological. Although there's also exposure to a terrorist ideology and a terrorist group, because if you were never exposed, you wouldn't join. And probably some group phenomena going on. But a lot of it's inside me. What do I need? How is this group meeting it? And alternative narratives are things like telling how great Europe is. And in Europe, they really want to push alternative narratives. And we've had a lot of discussions with counter-terrorism officials in Europe to say that won't resonate with your populations who are on a daily basis facing discrimination and marginalization. If you say to them, you have all these opportunities in Europe, and Europe is so great, and you should just ignore all this other stuff, and we're ignoring it too, you won't hit your audience. They won't resonate to it because their daily lived experiences are quite different. So we're looking to get to the person that's already listening to ISIS to delegitimize ISIS. But then there's this whole other issue of, well, then what do they do with their grievances and their unhappiness and their needs? Over to you, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to make a distinction, zooming out a little bit, between counter-radicalization and counter-recruitment. And counter-radicalization, alternative narratives, this is a fool's errand, because in the United States, it's not a crime to be a radical. And there are lots of radicals around the world. What you're trying to prevent And of course, we want to get rid of radical ideas if we can, but that's like boiling the ocean. Anne correctly pointed out that 40,000 foreign fighters joined ISIS. Well, think about the number of Muslims in the world. This is an infinitesimally small percentage. So you really want to target your messages to the people who are inclined to join. And so I agree completely with Elizabeth and Anne that defectors are the best way of doing that. So if we accept that counter-radicalization is too big a task and counter-recruitment is a kind of narrow task, I think that then allows you to say, well, what are the messages that are going to really work? And I think the messages that really work are just saying this group is not how it presents itself.
Elizabeth?
With regard to counter-narrative, I would go back to my original point, which is that this has to be really locally done for it to work. And it needs to reflect the kinds of recruitment and means of spreading ideology that the groups themselves use. So I, for example, was asked by the British military to help them come up with some material for leaflet drops in particular areas of the Arabian Peninsula. And this, to me, was ridiculous, because, of course, that's not how it works. My own research had focused very heavily on, in the Arabian Peninsula context, on poetry. Poetry used by the Mujahideen to spread their ideology. And, of course, that works in an oral culture, mainly. It's no good to just slap a poem onto a leaflet and drop it over a city. It won't work. And just to give you an idea of how it works, it occurred to me it might be quite fun just to give you a quick quotation. I mean, imagine this in context. This is one of my favorite poems from Al-Qaeda. So just a quick extract. من لي بمثل فوارس من نوعهم لا يرتدون الذل والإرجاء. And everyone joins in. إرجاء. لم يشهد الميدان مثل صنيعهم أسدا ضمادا خاضة الحجاء. حجاء. And you imagine the group bonding from that. That poem speaks, sorry to the translators, about some lions who are plunging into battle, who do not accept humiliation and being put off. It's about bravery. It's incredibly powerful at enticing new recruits and current recruits by celebrating the martyrdom in this poem. And when I looked up who had been martyred by looking up in non-Al-Qaeda sources, it was just a group of teenagers who had been caught in a house in Hadramaut and shot by the security forces. Nothing glamorous, they'd never killed anyone, they'd never done any operation, they'd done absolutely nothing. But this was a really powerful way of painting an alternative reality and a picture. So we should be using this.
Thank you for that. It reminds me when I was at the State Department heading counterterrorism communications, I actually thought of hiring a writer of anashid, but I couldn't think of how I could possibly explain that to the budget people, that I wanted to hire a writer of poetry or song lyrics. Omar, tell us about narratives and counter-narratives.
Okay, I'm going to base the counter-narrative, how you want to call it, into a form of an intervention. That's what I do. Well, because my job is I have to sit face-to-face in the room with somebody who's convicted for terrorism, radicalized, then I sit on prevention, pre-radicalization. So it is two things, prevent and intervention. So we've got two things. So I deal with them in the community, then I deal with them when they come out of prison. So there's two different hemispheres. But my mindset when I walk into the room, what I have in my mind, my head is exit door. You know why? Because every room you enter, there must be a door, a window that you got into the room. So my intervention will find a way. It's a process. Radicalization, it's a process. Some people don't get radicalized overnight. It takes time to get in, but it takes time to come out as well. Now, counter-narratives. Counter-narrative, what, like the other speaker, Powerful, said, we look at it at a very holistic, resilient approach. Number one, emotional well-being. That is a lot of problem. As a therapist, my other cases, a lot of problem. Social exclusion, massive. Grievance, that's another one. Now, theological resilience. Now we come to the ideological. Now many of them will come out, will say, ayah to safe, the verses of the sword. And then I say, okay, know your stuff before you get into the room. Especially, many of the specialists here, they will know they use Surah At-Tawbah, which is called the repentance, which start without Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, the only surah. And they only know that particular verses number 5, all of them. Now, based on that, when I worked in Africa, Middle East, and Europe with the Al-Muhajirun groups, all of them carry the same method, the same minhaj. But they change their tactics and strategy depending on the climate of the country. Last one is geopolitical foreign policy. It is an issue. We've heard it for the last 2 days, many of the debates, just the one before this talk about foreign policy. It is a massive thing that's going around. When I interview offenders, foreign fighters in the Balkan prison, Kosovo and Albania, then when I interview in London, then we all interview in Africa, we can see comparison of all of them. But counter-narrative is key, but please, don't leave the gap empty, because Mr. Baghdadi are very good to fill in that void. Young people, if they have a void in their life, the bad guy have 10 solutions. And by the time we reach, because remember, we work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, depending on the country you're. If you're here, you don't work Friday. ISIS works 72 hours a day. You know what I mean? So they spend more time with the young life or any bit, and they can smell vulnerability from miles away. Thank you.
Before we go to the questions from the audience, one last question from me, another round for all of you. You know, as I said in my opening remarks, radicalization is occurring now. It occurs after this spectacular decline of a meteoric rise and the meteoric fall of the Islamic State. And yet I'm old enough to remember 2011, 2012, when many prognosticators, and I was in the US government at the time, said, you know, well, Al-Qaeda after bin Laden's death is finished. It's over. And surprise, surprise, the junior varsity team, you know, stepped up and astonished the world. I wonder, looking at this and looking at all your deep experience that all of you have, where are we in this struggle? Where are we in this ideological struggle? If it's voids, us having to fill voids, we're in big trouble, because there are a lot of voids in the world, a lot of voids in the West and in the East. We'll start with Dr. Speckhard and go back, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience.
I guess I would say always the answer to terrorism is good governance and people believing in their futures, and not to repeat the Soviet line, but a bright future. And if you don't think you can get a job, if you can't get educated, if you don't feel it's fair, and maybe you have some opportunities, but you're frustrated compared to your abilities, these are all huge issues. And as Omar said, there is a void in many of us. But if you at least feel empowered to try to seek to fill that void on your own and through your peer network and through your family, you've got a chance. But if the system you live in makes that impossible, then you are going to listen to the siren song of terrorists, whether it's Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, ISIS. And I can tell you on our YouTube channel in Arabic, for our videos, we get a lot of guys saying we're coming back. And we know that they're still managing to call, I think it's 200 a month to Syria and Iraq. So, you know, the call of ISIS hasn't died. But as you said, it's a minuscule amount. And I just have to laugh when you said about boiling the ocean, because we had a debate in Holland about counter-narratives, and one of them said it's like throwing a bucket of water into a river. But I told them, you know, on St. Patrick's Day, we throw a little green bucket and it turns the river green. So it depends what's in the bucket. But boiling the ocean, I guess that's quite impossible. But anyway, I think good governance is really the answer. And of course, if we can delegitimize groups and delegitimize their message, we should by all means do it.
Peter?
You can't abolish God. You can, and so if you look at the 4 waves of terrorism we've had since the late 19th century, one was the anarchist wave. It burned itself out because by definition it didn't have any ideas. The second was the anti-colonial wave. It succeeded. It got the British out of much of Ireland. It got the French out of Algeria. And so it kind of crested and went away because it succeeded in its goals. Then you had the Marxist wave, the Brigati Rossi, the Baader-Meinhof. It basically kind of fizzled out with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now we have this wave, which everybody agrees began in 1979 for all sorts of reasons that we don't have to enumerate right now. And I think this wave is going to go on for a while. I was one of those prognosticators who was completely wrong about the death of bin Laden.
I was there when you said that.
Yeah. And, I thought the death of bin Laden and the Arab Spring game over because Al-Qaeda was not involved in the Arab Spring. The personnel, the ideas, it was very different. And, of course, it turned into something very different. So, the problem is, and the big difference between the Osama bin Laden era and today is the rise of sectarianism as a kind of, if you look at Al-Qaeda propaganda, it really didn't talk about the Shia, whereas and talked about Israel-Palestine, Saudi Arabia, Egypt. Now, the big things that are driving this are sectarianism, the collapse of Arab governance in many countries, the collapse of Arab economies in many countries, the demographic explosion in the Middle East and North Africa. Climate change, I think, has a role to play. And that also then feeds into the European phenomenon of mass Muslim immigration in Europe into countries that aren't prepared to accept immigrants, and then the rise of ultranationalist and proto-fascist parties in Europe, the spread of militant Salafism, all amplified by social media. So those are the conditions that produced ISIS. And those conditions will produce something else. And it may not be as effective as ISIS was, but it will be something.
Elizabeth?
So I'm reminded of your introduction, Ambassador, where you said Anwar al-Awlaqi was still very much a player in radicalizing people, and yet he has been dead since 2011. So what that tells us, as Anne said at the beginning, is that you can kill people, but you can't kill ideas. And so what you have to do is remove the reasons for people joining those ideas. And in my experience in research, that very much means a functioning state, meritocracy, and lack of corruption. It's all very simple. The problem is implementing it in these war zones that we have currently around the Middle East. Of course, it works quite differently inside the West. My own research is very heavily geared towards the Middle East itself.
Thank you. Omar, you have the other perspective of in the West.
Okay, I wish I can make a hashtag, you can't kill people, but you can kill the idea, yeah, but I'll get in trouble if I do the hashtag. The guys that we interview, based on that topic now, you know what they say? They say, Omar, we're not building a life for the next 20 years or 50 years. We're building a future forever. We love death more than we love life. So this is nothing. And for us, the way I looked at us, the way we worked, we're 10 years behind. We need to move faster. They are taking a rest and they're getting ready with new tactics. We've done just a study and will be published about Al-Muhajirun, the immigrants from the UK. They're very quiet. The leader of Al-Muhajir has been released on strict license from the prison. Now, another interview, the guy said, Omar, I can have an IPP. IPP in the UK is you get 99 years sentence. So you'll have a life sentence thing. He said, every minute, every second I spend in jail, I will give da'wah. I will get reward from God. So by you putting me in prison, you think you're going to move me away from that idea? No. I will make sure every single human being living, moving, I will tell them an idea. Now, when I was interviewing someone from the Balkans, he said to me, Omar, anta khawarij. If you know what is khawarij, I said, excuse me? Oh. I said, no, that's not my name. My name is Omar. No, he said to me, you belong to the khawarij, which is the extreme cult that the Prophet spoke about. And he said, we've already made the decision, the rest of the Muslim world are khawarij. That's why you are in the Darul Harb. You are the land of war. We are the land of Islam. And your blood become legitimate. So the threat is heavier this time. And I wish we can start very soon, because they're working very hard to play catch up like that film. Thank you.
Strong words, thank you. Let's go to questions. Why don't we start for the first one here? This gentleman with the white hair had his hand up first a long time ago before we even started speaking. So,
Thank you, Mr. President. I am liberal. I denounce these heinous acts and brutal committed by ISIS. No one accept, and I hope to find al-Baghdadi coming like Osama bin Laden, but all the panelists didn't answer the two questions. Who is responsible for this phenomenon, and how can we counter it? I have the answer, but who financed, who embraced, who trained, who armed, who received them in the White House and said, go to defend your mosques and die for your religion? And who, now ISIS, whom assigned for ISIS $500 million, while the liberation of Iraq was 60 million. I tell you quickly in 1 minute how we counter it. Stop, please, selling arms, which I called satanic swap, building jobs and prosperity in your countries and destroying our countries. Stop boasting totalitarian regimes which killing us day and night.
okay, is there a question there, or there's no question? Okay, thank you. Let's try to get a question this time. Okay, you there, Mr. Lawrence.
Elizabeth and Alberto, when you started talking about poetry, I started thinking about the jihadi rap and groups like Fundamental, the leader of which has spoken at Oxford, and the French and the German and the Scandinavian rappers who played a pretty major role in recruiting for ISIS. Many of them went to the field, and then
The Deso dog phenomenon.
yeah. And then I started thinking about within the rap community, the counter narratives are already there. We've seen failures of sort of governments trying to instrumentalize rap, but there's, beyond the kiss of death phenomenon, there's got to be a way to promote the counter narratives that are already there in the youth community, and the reason why most Muslims don't become radical jihadists. So I'm just wondering, sort of in this field of counter narratives, is there thinking about things like that, like within the rap community, how can, without having the kiss of death problem, we can help promote narratives that capture the imagination and promote, other ways of thinking?
I think that's a good question. Who wants to take that on? Yeah.
Very happy to take on questions on rap, anashid, and poetry. The really important point that you make is that the counter-narratives are already there, because that's key. It has to be authentic. It has to be generated within the same kind of group that's generating the original radical narrative, because within the same kind of circle, it is no good, as the ambassador was saying earlier, to try to fund someone to start penning anashid inside the White House or the Pentagon or the State Department. And similarly in the UK, we can't make this up ourselves, but what we can do is latch on to a large body of interesting, peaceful, authentic, tolerant work, whether it's song or poetry, and start to magnify its voice. But we shouldn't invent it ourselves.
Go ahead, Anne.
I'd like to also say, we've been talking since the time of Al-Qaeda about grassroots initiatives, but we wait and wait and wait for them to happen, and they don't. And we're not exactly sure why that is, or at least ones that are focused. And we have to reach the people that are being recruited and counter-recruit or prevent, and it may take a helping hand. So like a lot of these defectors and returnees are very happy to denounce ISIS, but they'd never make a video themselves. They need a helping hand. So it may be that some of us need to go into the communities and help raise these actors up. And that is happening. That's happening through the UK Home Office and through the Homeland Security and European initiatives. But I think it's both. I think things need to be authentic, but also sometimes there need to be outsiders coming and helping for that to happen. Because otherwise it doesn't, it's hard to do. I mean, I can say how hard it is to do our project.
Either of you want to add to that? Omar, go ahead.
Definitely counterproductive. We look at drama, where we've picked many young people, we've made them play the other role. So they become a non-recruiter, and there's somebody who's going to recruit them in university, just to see how they're, to play the role of a policeman, just to see with the other side. With the rapper, I met somebody from France. We had a program in Bangkok, the new landscape of terrorism. He had some lyrics around combating that narrative. But then it's tailor-made. You've got the other guys as well who, or from the the grassroots itself, they don't listen to music. Music is haram. Free mixing is haram. They will not sit in this room where there's women and men. So again, they will not come to a drama club, to a party. This is gonna be more a kind of a detached work. You have to go in the hood to work with them. And again, if it's theology, then it's tailor-made, you know what I mean? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, one of the great problems you have is combining anything related to government to relating to authenticity. Those two things don't go well together. Dr. Bloom, I think you have your hand up back there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. My question's primarily for Dr. Kendall or Peter. I mean, when we discuss these issues of poverty and terrorism, the research indicates that actually there might even be an inverse relationship. And so when you look at the number of millionaires or engineers for jihad, so the question then becomes, it's not simply jobs and money, because many of the people who join the jihad have a lot of money, have good jobs, have a good education. So is it just a reflection that, for example, Dr. Kendall, in Yemen, that's what a very good explainer is, but in the West, maybe less so. And so that it's important that we have not a general brush, but very specific roots into terrorism at different places. And I'm thinking about the work, and I think, Ambassador, you might have been involved with Priyank Mathur's Mythos project, where the idea is each video using comedy as counter-narrative is very much contextualized within that community. And so it's a lot of inside jokes in that language, and it doesn't necessarily travel. So I guess the question is, how much does this idea travel?
That's addressed to you.
Yes, no, I'm very happy to answer that. Mia, yes, that's an excellent question, and I think it hits the nail on the head, because this is precisely my point. It's that we need very strong local knowledge in order to understand the drivers in context. I remember that there was a lot of work, data-driven work, which is also unusual because most people use intuition, but by Mark Sageman, where he said, oh, actually, the drivers of jihad are not poverty or sexual frustration, etc. But then you look at his sample. His sample was those who had perpetuated terror attacks in the West, against the West. So actually, go somewhere like Yemen, these are the drivers. It is economic deprivation, sexual frustration, and the rest of it, and lack of education. All of these factors can play a role, but it just depends where you are. So the whole point is not to have a generalized view of how this works and how it can be countered, to figure it out.
If I could add to that. So we need to make a distinction between terrorism and insurgency. Terrorists are volunteers, often very well-off volunteers, like Osama bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri, Mohammed Atta. They volunteer their time. Insurgents are on a payroll, and we have Deputy Foreign Minister Hekmat Karzai here, who's been leading the Afghan efforts with the Taliban. The Taliban has to field a 30,000-man army, all of whom being paid a fair amount of money. ISIS had to field a fairly large army. Everybody was on the payroll. And so a lot of the things that we've discussed already do make sense in the context of insurgency because you're paying people and they tend to be economically deprived, and in the case in Yemen. But when you're talking about upper middle class, Mohammed Atta was the son of an Egyptian lawyer. He had a PhD from a German university, not an easy thing to get. So what prompted him to lead this massacre on 9/11 is a very complicated question, which we're certainly not going to solve on this panel.
Who has a short question?
Alberto, I just want to say something about ideas traveling. Ideas do travel. And the dream of ISIS traveled. Al-Qaeda's ideas traveled all around the world. I was in Kenya listening to Al-Shabaab guys, and they're saying the same ideas of Al-Qaeda guys. Of course it's contextualized. So some things are very, very local, and some things go global. And the things that go global, we can address them as ideas that travel and counter them. We know that jihadis that are manipulating Islam use 10 or 12 verses. I mean, you've got them all memorized, don't you? And you can address them anywhere in the world. So some things are global, some things are super contextual. So it's both. It's not either or.
Yes, General, yes.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to welcome you all to Doha. You see, gentleman near me, he wants to take the microphone again, so I just remember him. Okay. Definitely, this is a very constructive, discussion with regard to these issues. But we have to admit it, gentlemen, that if this is extremism happening in the Islamic society, might as well happening in a minority Islamic society. I mean, this is happening here in the Gulf, and we have suffered, a great deal from children, who really been, conveyed. And our study says that, through the internet, in 10 minutes, they can convert the, the 15, 16, 17 child to be extremist against his mother and father in 15 minutes. So therefore, I mean, this is studied, happened here in this, so I might as well say we have to admit it as father and mother families that there is something wrong along the line. If there is no weakness, we have to mitigate for those people, like the Kramer said, that, to penetrate through. We will, if we do, I'm talking about Muslim, Christianity, whatever ideology or religion. If we do our job right, manner is unified throughout the societies. And I think if we do our job right, I think after 16, I can send my child to most extremist individual. He will never be converted. But we have to protect him very well from the very beginning. If this happens, that means there is a crack somewhere in the education system, in the family structure, or somewhere where, somebody has penetrated. Regarding the organization itself, they classify them. We do definitely look at them like somebody, I call them the beneficiaries, which they never die, the leaders. These people are sending our child to die, but they are always sitting, taking the funds and sitting. There is in the middle area where people understand Islam wrongly. And these are the people who is carrying the message to those youngsters. And they're conveying. The beneficiary are never die, you never see them. And people are being sacrificed in this level. So therefore, I think without a joint effort from all societies, we have to understand, whoever religion is, that we have to really reconstruct the society in education. We have to reconstruct in youth, concentrate on those ones, fix them right. Up to 16, we can send them to any society. They can, I mean, to any really environment, they can live it 100%. Thank you.
Thank you. One last thing I wanted to mention. You remind me there's a very important thinker actually here in Qatar who's written about this very issue, who's Dr. Abdul Hamid Al-Ansari. He's written very thoughtfully on the issue of culture and education and for youth. Last words. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Sheikh. What you said about family is key. If we look at the biggest selling game, like PlayStation or Xbox, one of the biggest selling game in the world is Grand Theft Auto, GT. I think number 5 and number 6. You can kill, you can drive a car, wiring it, you can become a gangster. Then you've got something called Call of Duty. ISIS call it Call of Jihad, right? Assassin's Creed. We are creating this violent game. On Eid or Christmas Day, we give our children a gift. Before, when I was growing up, if I had to play with my friend, I have to knock on his door, ask his mom. We see each other. Today, our children play online. They don't have this social. So really, are we putting our children in danger? Moving to the education system, where most of our children spend 8 hours to 6 hours at school with the teacher. Then madrasa. There's a beautiful quote. I'll put it together. I'll just quickly just say that. Today's terrorism were yesterday's young people. Agree? They were young. They were youth. They were shabab. Tomorrow's terrorism could be today's young people if we don't start prevention now. So education in prevent in the UK, we take it very, very seriously. Now we're educating our imam as well. Because our imam are specialized, they give the khutbah, they read the beautiful Quran, but when it comes to this area, there's a gap. And we tested it in the Balkans, and I tested it with imam in prison. And we're putting some faith-based counseling, so theological narrative together. Because many of the guys are coming back are deeply rooted with deep theology because they're having halaqah. Halaqah meaning they have like a study circle now. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.